Seth, you once said that you write books because the idea deserves it. Tell us a little bit about your thought process behind your three new books that are coming out at the end of December. Why did you feel the need to write these particular books? And we can start with the Icarus Deception if you'd like.
Well, the Icarus Deception is it came from um, two things. One, seeing all the frustration around me, all the people whose dreams aren't being realized, the real disconnect between the industrial economy that we were sold and the reality of the end of the industrial age, combined with my frustration at seeing something that teachers and students and people who work for a living weren't seeing, which is this chance of a lifetime. That we are in a new revolution now. The last revolution was before our time. The Industrial Revolution, the Media Revolution in the early 1950s. It's when a revolution hits that the deck gets reshuffled and people get a new opportunity to make an impact. And that's right here and it's right now. And so what I wanted to do was, as clearly as I could, and I had to calm myself down because it's something I take very personally and I'm very passionate about, as clearly as I could outline how we have entered this new era and how the propaganda of the old one isn't going to get us very far. After I wrote the book, I looked at the last chapter of the book, and which is an alphabet, A through Z, and I decided to turn that into a book all into its own. So it's a kid's book, but it's for adults, illustrated by Hugh McLeod.
Okay.
And it takes you from A is for anxiety to Z is for Zabouillon, and sort of tries to get under your skin. So that's two of the books right there.
When you thought about and wrote the Icarus Deception, you talk a little bit about the safety zone that people were taught to live by during the industrialized age, and a safety zone that's apparently shifted in your mind in today's world, in today's global economy. Can you share with our viewers what this safety zone is, and how do we know where that safety zone should be placed? Is it different for each individual? Is it different for each industry?
Well,
What's that safety zone all about, Seth?
let's look at history. Everyone who's listening to this have more resources than the King of France did 200 years ago. Everybody. That what the industrial age did was it made us all rich. Even the poorest people on earth, the people who are making $3 a day, have access to technology and resources that were unimaginable 30 years ago. What that means is that when the industrial age came to town in the 1850s and the 1880s and 1900, and it said, do this and do this and do this, and we will make you rich, everyone listened. And so the industrialists said, we need workers. So we built school just for them. And they say, we need to dump stuff in the river. And we said, okay. And they said, we need to control the government. And we said, fine. You can do all of this as long as you give us TV and as long as you give us jobs that let us buy stuff. And so as a culture, we went through a century where we bought into this trade. And the trade is to do something very unnatural. Go to work every day, do what you're told. And in exchange, we get someone in authority who takes the blame. We get stability or apparent stability. We get the middle class. That was the trade, right? And it worked for a really long time. It worked for your parents and your grandparents and your great-great-parents. But just recently it stopped working. And at the same time that the industrial age stopped working, we can talk about why if you want, at the same time, the industrial age was replaced by the connection age. The connection economy says it is more valuable to exchange things. It is more valuable to know where things are. It is more valuable to be the one who makes the idea or causes the idea to happen than it is to work in a factory. And that's a massive shift. That what we see is that if you want to paralyze an economy, turn off their internet. Not turn off their electricity that runs the factory, but turn off their internet. And that in Long Beach, near where you live, if they go on strike at the docks, it costs you $1 billion a day. Because it's the moving of stuff, the connecting of stuff that we've built all our value around. And my argument here is that we were taught that the safe thing to do was not raise your hand in class. not question the boss, not step outside what you were trained to do, not do things where you had no authority. Those were safe things because if you stuck with it, you would succeed. And what we do, what all organisms do, is we create a place where we're comfortable that's safe. Now what's happened is that overlap between comfortable and safe has split. And so we feel comfortable doing this stuff that used to make us safe, but now it exposes us to danger. And that the safest thing to do is to play it risky. That the safest thing to do is to stand up, to ask questions, to lead, to connect, and to make art. And so when I got inspired for this part of the book, talking to a friend who was looking for a new job. Really amazing credentials, really talented, probably 50 years old, has earned her stripes. And I talked about other things she could be doing to find a living. And she said, well, that doesn't make me comfortable. That's outside my comfort zone to do those sorts of, run a conference or lead some sort of organization that didn't have a job involved in it. And I said, look, it may not be comfortable, but it's safe. The comfortable thing of sending out a resume to 3,000 places, that's just not going to get you where you need to go.
You talk about this safety zone, Seth, and I once read that you feel that fear is probably the most important human emotion that all of us have to learn how to tackle. How can they overcome this fear? Do you have any tips that you can suggest?
I work very hard not to give people a map. The problem with the map is if the terrain is shifting, the map doesn't help you. But I'm also really passionate about giving people a compass, because the magic of a compass is even if you get blown off course, you can get back on course. And one thing that we know about fear in this new economy is this. The only thing we want to connect with, the only thing we want to talk about are things that are interesting, remarkable, outside the traditional. All of those things have something in common with what I call art. And to create any of them means going into a place where you are afraid. So the compass here is fear. That when you feel like you shouldn't go in a given direction, that's exactly the way you should go. I am not suggesting anyone get rid of fear. That's almost impossible. What I'm suggesting is that when the amygdala speaks up, when the lizard brain says, don't do that, when the resistance says, I'll do it tomorrow, that is your signal to do it. That the things that scare you most are almost certainly the things that will help you succeed, unless you're afraid of spiders, in which case, just stay away from spiders.
You mentioned the lizard brain, and by the way, spiders are my big phobia, so let's not even go there. Lizards I'm okay with. I can deal with lizards. For those viewers that aren't familiar with that term, can you briefly explain to everyone what you mean by
Sure, I'll
that?
show it to you. It's right here. It's your amygdala, right next to your brain stem. It is a very powerful part of your brain. It is the prehistoric element of the brain. Every wild animal has one. It is responsible for revenge and reproduction and fear and survival. If it didn't exist, we would have been eaten by saber-toothed tigers long ago. The problem with this prehistoric brain is it's just not really comfortable with blogging. It's not really comfortable with public speaking. It's not really comfortable with writing something or doing something that people want to follow. So when you get ready to make a ruckus, to make an impact, to do the next thing, it's the part of your brain that's saying, don't do that. And the only difference between you and that person on stage is not that they're smarter than you. It's that they figured out that that signal from their amygdala is worth ignoring. Mitch, that someone comes up to you and says, I hear your company uses the telephone. Tell me how you use the telephone. I hear the telephone is a cool new way to build your business. The fact is every company uses the telephone. And no one says, well, we have a telephone marketing strategy. And no one says, we've figured out a better way to use the telephone. Because the telephone's ubiquitous. You just connect with people. You talk to people. You do something worth discussing on the phone, but the phone is irrelevant. Well, social media is the same thing. When we started, social media was the pink giraffe. And if you have a pink giraffe and it's the only pink giraffe around, everyone wants to see your pink giraffe. But now that everyone has a pink giraffe, having a Twitter account isn't worth a thing, right? So what we need to do is ignore the existence of social media and get back to first principles, which Chris has written about for years. And first principles are do something worth talking about as opposed to come up with a clever way to use the new social media.
You nailed it on the head. Everything that's always bothered me is that, no one ever asked Hemingway what kind of pencils he used. It just seems like the weirdest thing, but people will come up to me. I mean, I just met the mayor, just brought this guy over to me in the little town where I live. And as the guy's shaking my hand, he goes, "Hi, I don't tweet." I said, I don't care if you don't tweet. It's better if you don't tweet. Who cares? He was the head of housing in the town. I don't think he needs to tweet. But when we wrote Trust Agents, Julian Smith and I thought that we had this plan. Like, we were like, okay, there's this whole new channel and you can totally run wild there and it'll be great because no one's there. And everyone showed up and didn't really do it, as Seth uses the term, first principles. And so then we had to go and write another dumb book together because we said, okay, well, all right, well, everyone showed up, you blew that, but here's another way to look at it. And, I think the beauty in Seth and I play a somewhat similar game. He just does it a lot better. And you really just keep pointing out this really obvious truth a bunch of times in a row, and you just keep hoping, come on, this time, grab it, run with it.
Chris, Seth talks about dealing with fear and trying to understand where that safety zone is in the Icarus Deception. Uh, any thoughts or suggestions for people based upon your experiences, or maybe what you've watched Seth do over the years with dealing with that, finding out exactly where that safety zone is for
Well,
you?
so I put together, I've been working on this project called Brave Now, and the first part of what I did was something called Brave New Year. I was at a place where I told people that the opposite of bravery isn't fear. The opposite of bravery is surrender. And my point being is that fear is part of the system. And I love the way Seth writes about it, because Seth says, okay, you're afraid, now what? Keep doing the work. Stephen Pressfield, in his book Gates of Fire, which is about the Battle of Thermopylae, which is the 300 Spartans versus the 10,000 or more Persians, is basically, he says the opposite of fear is work. Meaning, if you're King Leonidas, you don't want to sit around and tell people, don't be afraid. You just make them work harder. His point was that don't give people mindsets, give them actions that'll lead you to the mindset. And I think that's what's missing. And very strongly what Seth's covering is this whole notion that, it's almost like he's so much a better book packager than me, because I would have put keep calm and carry on being torn off the side of the book because it's just so silly. I mean, George Orwell was never more right, is what I'm saying. Is what Seth has provided is a book to point out that the lies, the information, everything that's gotten us fat and round and sitting in a cubicle. It's time to kind of take the other pill in the Matrix language.
All very well said, Chris. I think that one of the problems that we've had with social media is that the early adopters, the ones who are the loudest, often find, as Levi Strauss did, that you succeed by selling accessories for explorers as opposed to exploring. And we don't need rivets and we don't need jeans. Everyone can figure out how to do this now. What we have to understand is that work used to involve physical labor, and now work involves emotional labor. And so if you're finding what you do easy, then you are probably not doing it right.
How do you create that connection that you're talking about with your audience? And how do you get over that safety net, that fear factor to create that, that connection? Any suggestions,
Well,
Seth?
first, I think we have to break the question down. What does the word audience mean? If you grew up with Johnny Carson, you think that audience means everyone. And what I argued in We Are All Weird is that everyone is no longer. And you need to start by shunning the non-believers. You need to understand that, as Kevin Kelly has said, 1,000 true fans is plenty. And that means that when you read people dumping on Amanda Palmer for one reason or another, whether they're misogynist or not, that's okay, because those people aren't her fans. And she has plenty of fans to do her art. Number two is, what does connection mean? Well, connection involves a level of vulnerability, that you don't get to be Miles Davis and play with your back to the room and say, I'm just going to do this, but you guys talk among yourselves. That what this non-electronic, new electronic medium means is that you need to go to the world and say, here, I made this. So on January 2nd, we're launching this in 220 cities so far, something called the Icarus Sessions. And the Icarus sessions are 140 seconds, little riff on Twitter, 140 seconds where you stand up in front of people in your town and you don't sell them anything and you don't pitch them anything, but you say, here, I made this. This is what I was afraid of. This is what was hard. This is what didn't work. And then you sit down. And the act of standing up and presenting your art, your work to the world starts connection. Whereas, that's very different, very different than people who want to sell you an 82-page long ebook for $149 with guaranteed step-by-step tips about how you can do X, Y, and Z. It's very different from people who are in this, retweet cycle where they figure if they just put enough in the world fast enough, they'll win. It's the opposite. But at this time, it's personal. And connection starts with personal.
Your second book that's coming out, which the V is for vulnerable. Can you share with us what this book's all about and what made you want to write it?
And what it argues, letter by letter by letter, is that art is hard. Art is lonely. Art is scary. Art exposes you to shame. And art is not painting, not drawing, it's not singing. Art is when a human being does personal work for the first time that connects with somebody else. So the second time that you paint Starry Starry Night, it's not art. It's just paint by numbers. The second time you say, hello, can I help you? You're just a robot. But when you connect with somebody else and you expose yourself and you're vulnerable, that is the labor going forward. We haven't taught anyone that. We've taught them to listen to the boss. And we're not going to value listening to the boss because there's someone cheaper than you who will listen to me, right? That this notion,
Well,
please go ahead. 26 letters of the alphabet, like Zebek, which is Xebec. A Zebek is a three-masted schooner that's often, in the old days, inhabited by pirates. So I wrote a little riff about what piracy means today. R is for rhyme and remix and reuse and recycle, and I talk a little bit about that. One of my favorite ones is O, which of course stands for one buttock playing. And if you don't know what one buttock playing is, go Google Ben Zander and watch his TED Talk, and you'll have a fabulous 18 minutes.
You also talk about worry. Worry is not preparation. And similar to being afraid, similar to dealing with fear, people many times have challenges with dealing with being worried about things. And can you share with us maybe just a little bit about what you talked about concerning the issue of being worried in this new book that's coming out at the end of this month?
Let's understand, Mitch, that if you're thinking of the world the way an industrialist does, you want it to be smooth and perfect and predictable. There's a lot to worry about. But I just hopefully made a little bit of the case that the industrial age is ending. And all of those things are bad things if you're an artist. If you're an artist, you don't want everything to be predictable and smooth and without error. So the stuff we used to worry about is stuff we actually need to look forward to. And so turning it all upside down is way more important than sort of scrawling a few small notes into the margin. And then the third book, I just got this in the mail today. It's called What You're Going to Do with That Duck. And if I had a flat head, it would, there we go.
There you go.
And I did publish, as Chris alluded to, a 19-pound, 800-page book with a 50-page index. And I offered it to the people who supported my Kickstarter months ago. I have to confess, when someone asks me for one now, I'm less than charitable, because if they didn't believe and trust in me then, I certainly can't give them my limited edition book now. But the people who did get in early, they got it. But I knew people would want a piece of it. It is the best posts from my blog from the last 7 years, plus a couple of extra ebooks as a bonus. So it's 625 pages. It only weighs 2 pounds, so it's a lot easier to carry than the 19-pound one. And it's called What You're Going to Do with That Duck, because the first post that I talk about is this one, which is lots of people are spending a lot of time getting their ducks in a row, which is fine. But the real question is, now that you got a duck, what you're going to do with it. Because getting your ducks in a row and perfecting the world around you isn't nearly as important as having a plan for what to do with that duck.
Mr. Myhr?
Hi, Seth. And how are you doing, Mitch? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're doing great.
I I've been teaching internet marketing and social media marketing for a decade, and many times I tell my students to follow your advice, Seth, which is fire 70% of your customers and focus on the 30% good ones. And my question to you today is whether technology has changed that equation for you. Do you think this still holds true, or can you more readily serve more customers today at a cost-effective way, that you would change that to some extent? Or if you still hold true to that, how do you convince people to get rid of customers? Because many small businesses say, are you crazy? Am I going to stop selling? I need every customer I can get.
Well, I think it depends on what you're selling. If you're selling something where you make it once and then you just duplicate it as many times as you can, clearly there's a huge incentive to create volume and to create market share. If you have a TV series, you want everyone to watch it because your revenue is 100% related to your ratings. But that's not the case in most small businesses. Most small businesses are wandering generalities. They try to appeal to every person in town, every person who walks by, every person who they can touch, but they make nothing that people would cross town for. They make nothing that people care about. And if you're going to make it as a small business on the internet when everybody else is a click away, how can you possibly make something for everyone? Someone bigger than you, more efficient than you, more cutthroat than you is going to make something for everyone. You have to make something for someone. And the minute a new customer shows up who isn't happy with being special, you have to say, sorry, go to my competitor next door. Go to that other place that sells stuff for everyone. I make stuff for special people.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense for small business, but sometimes for big businesses as well. When I speak to executives, they believe it's difficult to let go of customers as well, unless you show some really sophisticated accounting, perhaps. But from a principle standpoint.
When you were talking about big customers, there's several big giant brokerage houses in Boston. And one of them, I don't know if it was Fidelity or someone else, did the math and discovered that 2% of their customers were accounting for 95% of their customer service expenses. And when they did the math, these customers weren't worth it. So they called them up and they said, we think you could be better served by our competitor. Here's their phone number. We'd like you to transfer your account to them. And by moving all of those people over there to someone else who would take care of them to make a nickel, they had plenty of resources to take care of everything.
Yeah, no, certainly. I'll keep following that advice myself in my classes. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Star individual here that's already helped shape and mold the next generation of my family and hopefully generations beyond that. And Seth, I always tell people, and tell me if you agree or not, but people ask me, well, how can you afford to take time away from your law practice to do social media stuff? And I always tell them, how can I afford not to?
Yeah.
I think there's a social media blur in today's world. In other words, I don't think of this as not being at the office working. There's a combination now of often online interactivity and connections and relationships. Your books address that, and it took a bit of a challenge for me to get over that fear factor, to reach out to you and other people to make this happen. But it's been the best decision I've ever made. You got to step on those spiders, you got to deal with that reptile brain, and you got to move forward and enjoy your life. So I want to thank you for coming on today, and any last words of wisdom for our viewers concerning your 3 new upcoming books?
I want to point Cynthia Seymour to the ebook and video I did that are free called Stop Stealing Dreams. It's a manifesto to answer her question about the advice for the next generation and parents and kids. It's easy to find. Just search for Stop Stealing Dreams. And Johnny, if you check my blog tomorrow, you'll see more about the Icarus sessions. I hope you can find one in Orange County or wherever you are. Mitch, thank you so much for taking the time. You're very generous. You're a scholar and a gentleman. Everyone have fun. Thanks again.